Your soulmate saying, "I need to tell you what happened today. It's very urgent, please open this." There is a reason these words found you at this exact moment. Not by accident, not by coincidence, but because something quietly shifted today that neither of you expected. While you were living your ordinary hours, carrying your silent thoughts and wondering if anyone truly understood your heart, another heart was carrying your name with unusual intensity. Something happened. Something so unexpected that it interrupted their routine, silenced their doubts, and forced them to look at your connection in a completely different way. If you have been feeling a strange pull, an unexplained heaviness mixed with hope, trust that feeling. Sometimes the soul notices a change long before the mind can explain it. Today became one of those days. Your soulmate woke up believing it would be just another ordinary morning. They had plans, responsibilities, distractions. The same things that usually keep people from listening to what their heart is trying to say. But destiny has an unusual way of interrupting ordinary days. Without warning, a conversation, a memory, or even a quiet moment alone became impossible to ignore. Something reminded them of you so powerfully that it felt as though the universe itself refused to let your presence fade from their thoughts. They tried to move on with their day. They really did. Yet every path somehow led back to you. Every familiar place carried an unfamiliar emotion. Every quiet moment echoed with questions they had been avoiding for far too long. And then, everything changed. Not through something dramatic. Not through chaos. But through a realization so deep that it shook the walls they had carefully built around their emotions. For the first time in a long while, they stopped running from what their heart already knew. Sometimes life becomes loud so we stop listening. Other times, life becomes completely silent because that is the only way truth can finally be heard. Today was that silence. Your soulmate found themselves thinking about moments they believed were forgotten. Small details. Simple conversations. The way you made them feel seen without asking for anything in return. The kindness they never fully appreciated. The comfort they never admitted they needed. Piece by piece, the emotional puzzle they had ignored for so long began fitting together. And with every memory, one realization became harder to escape. Some connections refused to disappear because they were never meant to. That thought stayed with them. It followed them through every hour. Even while speaking with other people. Even while pretending everything was normal. Inside, something was awakening. Perhaps you have sensed this too. Have you noticed how certain memories have been appearing without warning? How songs suddenly sound different? How familiar places seem to carry emotions that were never there before? These moments are not asking you to chase answers. They are inviting you to stay open. Because when two souls are deeply connected, they often begin changing at the same time, even from miles apart. Your soulmate does not yet understand every reason behind what happened today. But one truth has become impossible for them to deny. The story they believed had ended may actually be preparing for its most meaningful chapter. Still, there is one detail about today's events that they have not spoken aloud to anyone. Not to family. Not to friends. Not even to themselves. Because saying it out loud would make everything real. And once that truth is spoken, nothing between your two paths will ever feel the same again. What they discovered in that quiet moment is about to change the direction of everything, but the next part reveals the single realization they never expected to have today. A strange kind of peace arrived. Not the kind that comes when every question has been answered, but the kind that appears just before life reveals something unforgettable. Your soulmate sat in complete silence, trying to understand why your presence suddenly felt so real. There was no message on their phone. No unexpected encounter. No obvious reason for your name to echo through their heart. And yet, they could not escape it. The more they tried to distract themselves, the clearer everything became. It was as if every unfinished emotion had quietly returned, asking for one thing: to finally be acknowledged. For a long time, they convinced themselves that moving forward meant leaving certain feelings behind. They believed time would erase the connection, soften the memories, and silence the questions that had followed them for so long. But today proved something different. Some bonds are not weakened by time. They are strengthened by truth. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded gently. Like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds after a long storm. One memory led to another. A smile they had forgotten. A conversation that suddenly carried new meaning. A moment they once considered ordinary now appeared extraordinary. They realized something that caught them completely off guard. The moments they treasured most always seemed to include you. That discovery filled them with emotions they weren't prepared to face. Regret. Gratitude. Hope. And something even deeper that words could barely describe. For the first time in a very long while, they stopped asking themselves, "Why did this happen?" Instead, they quietly whispered a different question. What if this connection was never truly over? That single thought changed everything. Because once the heart begins asking new questions, new possibilities begin to appear. Meanwhile, without even realizing it, you may have been experiencing your own quiet transformation. Perhaps you've been feeling unusually reflective. Perhaps certain dreams have stayed with you after waking. Perhaps you've sensed that something important was approaching without knowing why. Sometimes the soul prepares us before life does. Sometimes the heart recognizes tomorrow while the mind is still trying to understand today. And this is where today's story becomes even more remarkable. Because your soulmate didn't keep these feelings hidden forever. They almost reached out. Their hand moved toward their phone. Your name crossed their mind again. A message began forming. Then they stopped. Not because they no longer cared. But because they wanted to be certain that what they were feeling was real. So they waited. Only for a moment. Only long enough to listen to the quiet voice inside that had been speaking all day. What they heard next left them completely speechless. It wasn't a voice filled with fear. It wasn't doubt. It was clarity. A clarity that reminded them some people enter your life for a season. But others become part of your soul's journey forever. At that very moment, something inside them softened. The walls they had spent so much time building no longer felt necessary. The distance between what they felt and what they wanted to say suddenly became smaller than ever before. Still, there is one extraordinary detail they have not shared. One unexpected event happened just minutes later. An event so perfectly timed that even they struggled to explain it. It felt less like coincidence. And more like an answer they never knew they had been waiting for. What happened next is the moment that transformed quiet hope into undeniable certainty, and that is where the story continues. Just when they believed the day had already revealed everything, life offered one more unexpected moment. It happened so naturally that anyone else might have dismissed it as ordinary. But your soulmate couldn't. Because deep inside, they felt something whisper. Pay attention. In that quiet instant, the world around them seemed to slow down. The noise faded. The endless rush of responsibilities disappeared. For a few precious seconds, there was only stillness, and the unmistakable feeling that they were standing at the edge of a new beginning. Then it happened. Something familiar crossed their path. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't impossible. Yet somehow it carried a meaning that reached far beyond the moment itself. It reminded them of you. Not in a painful way, but in the kind of way that brings unexpected peace. A peace that says, some stories are still being written. Your soulmate stood there, unable to explain why their heart suddenly felt lighter. For so long, they had been searching for certainty in places that could never provide it. Today, they discovered something far more valuable. Sometimes certainty doesn't arrive with loud answers. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet confidence that refuses to leave. That confidence stayed with them. It followed them into every thought, every breath, every silent prayer they had never spoken aloud. They began looking back over the journey that brought them here. Not to relive old pain, but to understand it. Because distance often teaches lessons that closeness cannot. They realized every delay had shaped them. Every disappointment had softened parts of their heart that once resisted change. Every unanswered question had quietly prepared them for this moment. Then another realization appeared. One they had never allowed themselves to believe before. What if the waiting had never been punishment? What if it had been preparation? Preparation for two hearts to grow separately. So they could one day recognize each other with greater wisdom, deeper compassion, and a love that no longer depended on fear. That thought stayed with them. And with every passing minute, they felt less afraid of the future. Instead, they became curious. Curious about the conversations that had never happened. The smiles that had never been shared. The possibilities that still remained untouched. Hope began replacing hesitation. Not because every obstacle had disappeared, but because their perspective had changed. And when perspective changes, everything else begins to move. Perhaps this message has found you because your own heart is changing too. Perhaps you've been learning to release what you cannot control. To trust what you cannot yet see. To believe that meaningful connections are strengthened by patience rather than weakened by time. If that is true, then your journey and your soulmate's journey are beginning to reflect one another like two rivers slowly flowing toward the same destination. Yet the most surprising part of today had not happened. As evening approached, something occurred that they never expected. A single conversation. A simple sentence. A moment so ordinary on the outside that no one else would have noticed it. But to your soulmate, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle they had been carrying for far too long. Those words awakened a decision they had postponed again and again. A decision that could no longer remain hidden. Their heart knew exactly what it wanted to do next. The only question was whether they would find the courage to follow through. And the answer to that question began unfolding before the night was over. Night arrived with a different kind of silence. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence that often appears when the heart is standing in front of an important choice. Your soulmate could feel it. The day had changed something deep within them, and no matter how hard they tried to return to the person they had been that morning, they couldn't. Too much had become clear. Too many emotions had finally found the courage to rise to the surface. For a while, they simply looked out into the darkness. No distractions. No hurried decisions. Just a quiet conversation between their heart and their soul. They asked themselves a question they had avoided for far too long. If I keep pretending these feelings don't exist, what will I lose? The answer came gently. Not with fear. Not with regret. But with honesty. They realized that the greatest risk was never opening their heart. The greatest risk was allowing another day to pass without honoring what had become impossible to ignore. Something inside them finally relaxed. The weight they had carried for so long began to disappear. Not because every uncertainty had vanished, but because they no longer wanted fear to make their decisions. That was the turning point. The moment when hesitation slowly gave way to quiet courage. At the very same time, you may have felt an unexpected calm settling over your own heart. Perhaps you couldn't explain it. Perhaps it lasted only a few moments. Yet something within you seemed to whisper. Keep believing. There are seasons when life appears completely still. Nothing seems to move. Nothing seems to change. Yet beneath the surface, countless unseen pieces are quietly falling into place. Tonight became one of those moments. Your soulmate began imagining what they would say if they had the chance to speak openly. Not rehearsed words. Not perfect sentences. Just the truth. The truth they had hidden behind uncertainty. The truth they could no longer silence. They imagined telling you how often your memory returned when they least expected it. How certain moments felt incomplete without you. How even after trying to move forward, something inside them continued to hope that life might create another opportunity. Those thoughts no longer frightened them. Instead, they filled them with gratitude. Because they finally understood something many people spend years searching for. Real connections do not demand perfection. They ask only for honesty. And honesty was becoming stronger than fear. As midnight drew closer, your soulmate made a quiet promise. Not to anyone else. But to themselves. They promised they would stop running from what their heart had been trying to say all along. They promised they would no longer allow doubt to write the next chapter of their story. It was a promise no one else heard. Yet it carried more power than the loudest declaration. Because promises made in silence often become the ones that truly transform a life. Still, before this day could come to an end, one final moment remained. A moment so unexpected that it felt almost impossible to ignore. It wasn't a grand miracle. It wasn't something the world would celebrate. But to your soulmate, it felt like the quiet confirmation they had been asking for without ever speaking the words aloud. That single moment inspired one decision. A decision connected to you. A decision they never imagined they would be ready to make. And when the first light of a new day appeared, everything inside them was different. What they chose to do next may become the beginning of a chapter neither of you expected, and that chapter begins in the next part. The first light of morning carried something different. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because your soulmate had. The questions that once filled their heart had become quieter. The confusion that had followed them for so long no longer held the same power. In its place was something stronger. A quiet certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't need to be announced to the world because it already knows where it belongs. As the sun rose, they took one slow breath and smiled. Not because every answer had arrived, but because they finally stopped fighting what their heart had been trying to reveal all along. They understood that love is not measured by perfect timing. It is measured by the courage to remain open, even after disappointment. By the willingness to hope, even after uncertainty. By the strength to believe that meaningful connections are worth protecting. That was the real message hidden inside everything that happened today. It was never about one dramatic event. It was about a heart awakening. A heart choosing honesty over fear. A heart deciding that silence could no longer carry feelings that deserved to be spoken. And somewhere within that quiet realization, your name remained. Not as a memory they wished to forget, but as someone whose presence had shaped their journey in ways they were only now beginning to understand. Perhaps this message has reached you because your own heart has been searching for reassurance. Perhaps you've wondered whether your kindness mattered. Whether your patience was seen. Whether the love you gave ever made a difference. Never underestimate the quiet impact of a sincere heart. Even when you cannot see the results immediately. Seeds planted with love often bloom long after they disappear beneath the surface. Life has a remarkable way of bringing clarity at exactly the right moment. Not always when we ask, but often when we are finally ready to receive it. So if today has reminded you of someone special, let it also remind you of something equally important. Continue becoming the person you are meant to be. Protect your peace. Choose compassion over bitterness. Allow hope to remain stronger than fear. The future is shaped one faithful step at a time, and every step taken with love creates possibilities that cannot always be seen today. Your soulmate has begun a new chapter within themselves. Now your own chapter continues. Not with pressure. Not with certainty about what tomorrow will bring. But with quiet confidence that every meaningful relationship is built through honesty, patience, growth, and grace. Carry that truth with you. Let it guide your decisions. Let it strengthen your spirit. And whenever life feels uncertain, remember this. The greatest stories are rarely written in a single day. They unfold one choice. One moment. One act of courage at a time. If this message brought peace to your heart, take a moment to pause and reflect on the people who have helped you grow. Hold on to hope, keep your heart open to kindness, and step into tomorrow believing that every new day carries the possibility of healing, understanding, and unexpected joy. Until our next journey together. May your heart remain strong, your spirit remain hopeful, and your path be filled with light that gently leads you toward the life you are meant to build.